Welcome to chapter 34 of the book of Genesis. Dinah is humbled by Shechem. I'll read a little in the Greek and we'll go through the chapter. Exilthe de Dina e thigatir Leas in etike to Yaakov katamathin tas thigateres ton echorion ke Ethan avtin Sichem, o Eos Amor, o Eveos, o Archon tis Gis. And went forth Dinah, the daughter whom Leah bore to Jacob. And I believe she bore 4 or 5 sons. And Dinah was, I think, the last of them all, so she was the youngest. And she went forth to study the daughters of the native inhabitants. Now, Jacob had purchased this land from Emor, who was the ruler, or Hamor, of Shechem, the city of Shechem. It gets confusing because we have a person by the name of Shechem and a place by the name of Shechem. But anyway, Jacob purchased this land, so he was fairly close to these people, but they were strangers to this land. They came from Mesopotamia, between the 2 rivers, down south, I believe in Ur the Chaldees, and came up to Haran, stayed there, which was up northern Syria, and then Jacob came down into this land. So he was a foreigner to these people. They didn't know a lot of the things about these people. And these Canaanites had not yet been prophesied by God to be destroyed. They were there, and they were not, of course, followers of Creator God, Yahweh, but they had idols. And so, but they were not, I don't believe Jacob or Abraham and Isaac were told to destroy them like what happened later with Moses when they went back into Canaan after going into Egypt. Now, in verse 2, it begins and it says, and Shechem beheld her, that is Dinah. She was a fairly young woman. It calls her a child in another place. And so she was going to find out what these people are doing, how the daughters, what they did, what they were wearing maybe, and things that young girls are interested in. And Shechem was, it says, verse 19, the most honorable in the house of his father, who was, and here it says, and Shechem beheld her, the son of Amor, or Hamor, the Eveos, the Hivite, the ruler of the land. And so the father ruled, and so this put Shechem in a high plane as far as or high stature, I guess it would be better called, because he was the son of the ruler. And he probably thought he could do whatever he would like to do, possibly. And it says, in taking her, he went to bed with her and humbled her. Now, I don't think it was rape. She could have allowed this to happen. It doesn't really say. The humbling her doesn't necessarily mean that he raped her. He humbled her because she ended up living with him, and her estate of being with the Jews was more or less ruined. And so this was humbling her by her not being what she was supposed to be as far as the father Jacob and the sons, who were all followers of Yahweh. Now, humble in other places has to do with pride, but I don't think this has anything to do with pride here. Humbling her was basically putting her in a lower estate to where she could have been if she wouldn't have went there. And she ends up, it says in verse 26, staying with Shechem. So she had relations with him and possibly became pregnant, doesn't say. And he loved the virgin and spoke concerning the thought of her virgin state. Of course, she was a virgin when he had relations with her, not afterwards. And so he loved her, basically. He was honorable, as it says, used to doing what he wanted to do. So Shechem said to Hamor, his father, saying, take to me this maidservant for a wife, sort of the same thing that Samson did with his parents, told them to take a woman from the Philistines, doing what he wanted to do. And Jacob heard that the son of Hamor defiled Dinah, his daughter, had relations. Now, defiling his daughter is basically disobeying her father, disobeying the orders of God, which we see in verse 27. Being defiled also in the Bible, touching things unclean throughout the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Being defiled, touching things that are unclean, or committing adultery. As far as being defiled, in the New Testament, in 1 Timothy, Paul says, all things indeed are pure to the pure, but to the ones being defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, but even their mind and conscience is defiled. But it continues in 5, but his sons, Jacob's, were with the cattle in the plain. And Jacob remained silent until they came. And came forth Hamor, the father of Shechem, to Jacob to speak to him. And the sons of Jacob came from out of the plain. And as they heard, the men were vexed, the 11 sons of Jacob, and it was distressing to them exceedingly, for that Shechem did an indecent act in Israel by going to bed with the daughter of Jacob. Now, this is the first place Israel is mentioned as a people. And not thus shall it be. And this may have been written later as a commentary on this shouldn't be. And verse 8, and Hamor spoke to them, saying, Shechem, my son, prefers your daughter in his soul. Give her then to him as wife. So he wants to have the wife for Shechem, Dinah, and be allied by marriage to us. You give us your daughters, and you take our daughters for your sons. Now, remember, the Canaanite women were an abomination to Rebekah, and Esau married into them, but Rebekah saw them as an abomination. So we have the early development of a people that are separate. The people from Abraham and Isaac and now Jacob and the 12 tribes becoming separate as far as their identity is no longer idolatrous, but it is around a monotheistic God, the Creator God, and it's different than these other people. But these other people want to be allied with the sons of Jacob. And then he continues, that is Hamor, dwell with us, and the land, behold, it's spacious before you. Will you dwell and do trade in it and acquire possessions in it. Well, joining up with unbelievers is not the thing to do. And a good lesson for us, when people want us to join in with the things that are ungodly, this is not what we are to do. We are to be separate for Jesus, for Christ, the things of God. And we're constantly being attacked by the unbelievers to fall into their ways of life. And we are to not do that, even though it sounds good. You dwell and do trade in it and acquire possessions in it. Oh, you can go, with us and do all these things. You'll make a lot of money and all sorts of wonderful things that they would say to us, Christians. And Shechem said to her father and to her brothers, I want to find favor before you, and whatever you should have said, we will give. I want to do it. Whatever you want, we will go along with it, and maybe people that are wanting us to do what they want to do will offer certain things and incentives for us to not do the things of Christ, but to do other things. Money, power, marriage, all sorts of things. Marry a woman that's a non-believer, but it's beautiful. In verse 12, he says, you multiply the dowry exceedingly. Whatever money you want, we'll give it. And I will give it insofar as whatever you should have said to me. So money was no object. And you shall give to me this child as wife. All right? But it was all right with Hamor, but not with the sons of Jacob. It says, and the sons of Jacob responded to Shechem and Hamor, his father, with treachery. Deceit is another word for tholu. Treachery, or with cunning. Cunning is not quite as destructive as treachery, and deceit is also not. There's like 3 levels there. Treachery is the worst, deceit, and then cunning. And they spoke to them, that would be, I think, the sons of Jacob, to Hamor and Shechem, and for they defiled Dinah, their sister. And Simeon and Levi, the brothers of Dinah, said to them, Simeon and Levi were sons of Leah, and so they were a blood brother on both sides, the mother and the father. We shall not be able to do this matter to give our sister to a man who has a foreskin, for it is scorn to us. Now, their treachery is a thing that is mentioned in Matthew 26:4, that we see treachery with Jesus. And it says about the Jews, and they were advising that they should seize Jesus by treachery and should kill him. So treachery is not a good thing, but yet we'll find out what happens because of this treachery. Bad things happen. And then in Peter says, for the one wanting to love life and to behold good days, let him cease his tongue from evil and his lips to not speak deceit, which is the same word. Not to be deceitful, to be truthful, which these men weren't. They were lying about this. And it continues, only in this we will be like you and dwell among you if you're circumcised. If you should become as us, and we, you, in the circumcision of every male of yours. And we will give our daughters to you. Now circumcision was only with the grandfather, Abraham. It was where it was instituted with these people. And we will give our daughters to you, and from your daughters we will take to ourselves wives. Of course, they're not going to do that. They don't want to do that. And we will live by you, and we will be one genus, one race. But if you should not listen to us, that you should be circumcised, well, taking our daughter, we shall go forth. So there we see that Dinah was still with Shechem and Hamor. Verse 18, and the words were pleasing before Hamor and before Shechem, the son of Hamor. Well, I wouldn't think they would be too pleased to have to be circumcised, an adult, but it is what it is. And the young men did not pass time to do this word, for he, Shechem, clung to the daughter of Jacob, and he was most honorable of all the ones in the house of his father. It's almost turning into a Romeo and Juliet type of a story, where the man, Romeo, falls in love with the Juliet of a different family in Italy. But Romeo and Juliet, I think it was Shakespeare. And so maybe Shakespeare got it from this story here, who knows? In verse 20, and Hamor and Shechem his son came to the gate of their city, and they spoke to the men of their city, saying, oh, these men are peaceable with us. So yeah, well, not quite. Let them live upon the land and trade in it. And the land, behold, it's spacious before them. They have all kinds of land. And we shall take to ourselves wives of their daughters, and we shall give our daughters to them. In this only will the men be like us to dwell with us, so as to be one people, in every male of us being circumcised, as also they have been circumcised. Well, I don't think men wanted to hear that, but it is what it is again. And their cattle and their four-footed animals and their possessions, will they not be ours? Only in this we should be like them, and they will live with us. It's interesting how the Muslims, I believe circumcision is important to them, to be circumcised. So the circumcision is something that was, I don't know where else it was mentioned in history outside of here with Abraham, but maybe other places. But it would be an interesting topic, I suppose, to study. In verse 24, it continues, and they, the people, listened to Hamor and Shechem his son, and all the ones going forth at the gate of their city, even were circumcised in the flesh of their foreskin, every male. And it came to pass in the third day, when they were in misery, pain, the two sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, brothers of Dinah, each taking his sword, then entered into the city safely and killed every male. Arsenicon, we have arsenic, a strong poison, and 732.1, you can add that to your English derivatives book. Also Hamor and Shechem, his son, they killed by the sword, on the mouth of the sword, and they took Dinah from out of the house of Shechem and went forth. Now, men controlling the women is something that's still going on today, especially among the Muslims, maybe in some parts of sub-Saharan, I guess all of Africa. I'm not sure about Asia, how much the men control the women, but this is something that's going on. It's been going on in the United States for hundreds of years until the 60s with the feminist movement, which is pretty much changing it. But a lot of bad things have happened to women by men, and it's something that's been going on, and it was warned and forecast by God at the beginning when Adam and Eve sinned, and with Satan and the woman would give birth, and she would be obedient to the husband and so forth. And the sons of Jacob entered unto the traumatized. You can add that to your English derivatives book. the sons of Jacob entered unto the wounded and plundered the city in which Dinah, their sister, was defiled. And their sheep and their oxen and their donkeys, as much as was in the city, and as much as was in the plain they took. And all their persons, and all their belongings and their women they captured. They made them slaves, I suppose. And they plundered as much as was in the city, and as much was in the houses. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, You've made me detested so as for me to be wicked to all the ones dwelling in the land, among both the Canaanites and among the Perizzites. Now, Jacob wasn't concerned that they killed these people, but that it would harm him in the long run, thinking about himself. Now, killing people that are not like you, that you think you're doing the right thing, and yet you're not, has been something that has been going on for centuries. I was thinking about the Roman Catholics in their rule of religious institutions and countries for 1,500 years. They had the Inquisition, Spanish Inquisition, in the 1390s, and they attacked many Jews. And then they attacked the Waldensians up by, I believe they're close to Switzerland, who were early reformers in 1184, killed them, attacked them. And then they murdered John Huss, a reformer, in 1398. And then they killed John Wycliffe, who wanted to translate the Bible into English, and they killed him in 1377. I believe they killed him, or at least they persecuted him. But there was also the reformers on the 1500. We had John Calvin in Switzerland, and he had Michael Servetus and Jacques Cruet, beheaded men who were reformers that disagreed with Calvin. And then Ulrich Zwingli in Switzerland declared more or less a war against the Anabaptists, who would be today's like Mennonite and Amish and so forth. And in England, we had the Church of England, Henry VIII, against William Tyndale, who wanted to translate the Bible into English, and he was strangled by Henry VIII's henchmen in Belgium. So all these things have been going on down with people thinking they're doing the right thing, and they'll kill other people because they're doing the things. Jesus warns about that, and he says that people will be killing the Christians, us, thinking they are doing what God wants them to do. So these men, thinking they're doing the right thing, have caused all of this problems. That's what Jacob sees. And to all the ones dwelling in the land, among both the Canaanites and among the Perizzites. And I am very few in number, there's not very many of us, and gathering against me, they shall cut me down, and I shall be obliterated, I and my house. What did you guys do? And they said, well, but as a harlot, they treated our sister. So they see what they did and didn't want that, didn't like it, and got even, basically. Interesting story. Continues as we see in history on down to today, where you see where people of other religions, I think of Hindus, and the daughter becomes a Christian, and they'll end up killing the daughter if she becomes of another religion, or becomes a Muslim, or a Muslim becomes a Christian or a Hindu, and so forth. It still is happening even today. Chapter 35, our next video seminar, it says Jacob builds an altar at Bethel, and we'll continue with the story of Jacob. Our next video seminar, hope you join us. Until then, God bless.